Honeywell's next-generation flight management system for Embraer's E-Jets features numerous tools to help with the flight planning and decision-making process. One of these tools is the ability to create and edit secondary flight plans and secondary performance calculations. The primary purpose of the secondary flight plan function is to allow the crew to evaluate different operational scenarios. A secondary flight plan can also be used to review a data link uplink flight plan or to define the route for the next segment of the trip. In this video, we will discuss how to modify secondary flight plans, how to review pending performance updates for different en route scenarios, and how to activate the changes into the active flight plan. Secondary flight planning is mainly used to evaluate changes in routing, speed, or altitude for the active flight plan. While en route from Phoenix to Dallas, air traffic control has given you the option to take a reroute or descend 4,000 feet and slow down due to spacing into Dallas-Fort Worth. The secondary flight plan menu, which is found under the Nav Index menu, is divided so that you can create and review two separate secondary flight plans and performance scenarios. The bottom three line select keys are used for secondary flight plan number 1 or secondary flight plan number 2 in order to copy the active flight plan, swap the secondary flight plan with the active, or clear either secondary flight plan currently stored in the FMS. To begin evaluating whether a change in routing or a change in altitude and airspeed would be best, copy the active flight plan into secondary flight plan number 1. When you copy the active flight plan to a secondary flight plan, the performance is also initialized for the secondary flight plan using the active flight plan performance initialization. For the first part of this scenario, just the route of flight is being modified for secondary flight plan number 1. The speed and altitude are to remain the same, so there is no need to make any changes to the performance initialization that was copied over from the active flight plan. Modify the flight plan with the possible reroute that ATC has given you as one of your two options. Return to the secondary index, check the performance data, and compare the secondary performance with the active performance on the other FMS to see how the new routing affects fuel burn and time en route. The second option ATC has given you is a lower altitude and slower airspeed for spacing into DFW while remaining on the original flight planned route. To compare this with the option of a reroute, copy the current active flight plan into secondary flight plan number 2. Return to the secondary index and select Performance Initialization. The performance is automatically initialized for the secondary flight plans using the current active flight plan performance initialization. On page 2 of the secondary performance initialization, change the cruise altitude to the flight level ATC gave you as an option. Page 3 of the secondary performance initialization page displays climb, cruise, and descent speeds with the option to change each of them. Aircraft equipped with NG-FMS have the option to fly economic speeds based on a cost index. When used appropriately, the cost index feature can help operators significantly reduce overall operating costs. If cost index is enabled, economic speeds are the default values. You can line select OR to change the speeds for one or all three phases of flight. For this particular scenario, ATC has advised that they would need you to fly Mach 7.2, so enter that for the cruise speed. The cruise speed is changed while the economic speeds remain for climb and descent. The original route of flight is no longer an option per ATC, so return to the performance data page for secondary flight plan number 2 and compare the secondary performance with secondary flight plan number 1 on the other FMS to see how the change in altitude and speed affects the fuel burn and time en route. After reviewing secondary flight plan number 1 and 2, you have determined which secondary flight plan you would like to use. Return to the secondary flight plan menu and swap that secondary flight plan with the active flight plan. The modified active flight plan is now displayed, and the new route is shown on the MFD as a dashed white line. After verifying the modifications, activate the modified flight plan. Page 3 of the Performance Initialization displays the cost index value. Flying at economic speed will minimize the direct operational cost for all phases of flight. This allows the operator to minimize the overall cost of operation, including time-based costs of an aircraft, and is not necessarily limited to fuel-related costs. If this option is enabled, cost index values can be entered anytime by the flight crew. The lower the cost index, the slower the airspeeds and Mach numbers for each phase of flight. The higher the cost index, the faster the airspeeds and Mach numbers for each phase of flight. After a reroute has been given by air traffic control and accepted by the crew, it is the policy of some companies to update dispatch with the new flight planned route. In this scenario, once you have notified dispatch of the reroute, they ask you to update the cost index. To change the cost index, copy the active flight plan to secondary flight plan number 1 or number 2 and proceed to the Performance Initialization page since no changes are being made to the route of flight. Update the cost index and leave the economic default selections for all 3 phases of flight. Note that the speeds are updated based on the new cost index. Select Performance Data and compare the secondary performance with the active performance on the other FMS to see how the change in the cost index affects the fuel burn and time en route. To update the active performance initialization with the new cost index, return to the secondary flight plan menu, swap the secondary flight plan with the active flight plan, and activate. This has been an overview of secondary flight planning and performance using Honeywell's next-generation flight management system for Embraer's E-Jets. Please refer to the Pilot's Guide for more information.
When we think of the 5-year plan, the growth strategy will continue to evolve with our great portfolio. Sales over the next 5 years will be growing 4 to 6%, so that we should add 7 to 12 billion, getting to 46 to 51, and you'll see a lot of it just coming.